Welcome to Sturminster Newton, an ancient town in the heart of the beautiful Blackmore Vale in Dorset. Our first question, please.
Ria Bristow. Is our police force inherently racist, or do they need to overhaul their recruitment practices?
Nigel Farage.
At the time of Macpherson, I took the view that we were beating ourselves up on this issue as a country far more than we needed to do. Certainly having spent the last 12 years working in Europe, I think we are a more open, tolerant, freer society, certainly than our neighbours. However, I think this issue, and if you listen to those tapes that have precipitated this particular row, this isn't just about racism in the police force, this is about low standards in the police force. And I think the levels, not just of bad language, of racism, of intolerance, of, I'm afraid, completely unacceptable links to Murdoch's News Group International, tell me there is something more going wrong with the police than just racist language being used. But I have to say, we do need to think about racism, and I think about it more now than I've ever done before. And the reason is this. We've just been through 15 years of mass, uncontrolled immigration into this country on a scale that we've never seen before in these islands, and I'm sorry to say that division within society and racism is growing through all sections of our community, and I believe that George Galloway's victory in Bradford West last week is perhaps the best example of that.
Our next, please.
Thelma Wood. Surely anyone who is inadequate at their jobs should be sacked, and not just the teachers.
Nigel Farage.
Well, of course, you're absolutely right, and I must say, in terms of a teaching profession, there is a real problem here. Now, I mean, I'm not supposed to say this, but the truth of it is that there is almost no way at the moment that the state sector can get rid of bad teachers. A friend of mine took on a new academy in Kent, and he's doing everything he can to bring back into that school competitive sport, some form of discipline. He said to me, Nigel, we're doing well. He said, but 1 in 5 of my teachers, frankly, are not up to speed and are holding the children back, but I simply cannot. It's too difficult to sack anybody. So I feel very sorry for him trying to do that. And actually,
teachers do have the right, after a certain period, to say, you're out.
They do, but Jonathan, it is, I'm afraid, within the state system, if you do that, you're incurring the wrath of the unions. And I think the question actually brings a bigger point out. Teachers may be one example, but there is a problem here with the public sector in this country. You know, anybody here that's worked in the private sector knows if they don't cut the mustard, they're out. And it's as simple as that. And I'm afraid within the public sector, and a public sector, incidentally, that whilst Ben's government was in power, grew by nearly 1 million people, virtually nobody ever gets sacked. And I've seen how public's money is spent in Brussels over the last 12 years, where the accounts have not been signed off by the auditors for 17 years in a row, and yet nobody has been sacked for all this waste of money. So we need to get more competitive in the public sector. That's my view.
To save... Ben Bradshaw.
It's simply not true to say it's almost impossible to get rid of teachers. Of course, anyone who is inadequate at their job, to go back to the question, needs to be managed. Now, that may mean being managed out of the organisation, but it may also mean being retrained.
Two things. When you say that they may have to be managed out of the organisation, do you mean sacked?
Well,
This is
yes.
wonderful New Labour,
yes,
isn't it?
yes, but there are the whole point about this is not summary dismissal, Jonathan.
So they were got rid of through natural wastage, weren't they?
No.
10%, they retired, they fell ill, they weren't actually sacked then, were they? Come on.
It's about due process. If you're arguing for summary dismissal, I mean, the danger of this, of course, and this is exactly, I mean, I don't agree with the teachers' unions on a lot of what they're talking about, but when they warn about the dangers of a bully's charter, you have to be very careful about that.
You know, teachers should be people that we respect and admire, and by criticising them in this way and suggesting that there are loads of them that need sacking, all the sort of backdrop of mistrust that this has, I just find so upsetting, because I see now so many parents questioning in front of their own children a teacher. I think a parent should always let a teacher be superior to them.
Well, what if your child was suffering from a really bad teacher for a whole year? Would you be happy with that?
I would be very reticent about showing my mistrust and disrespect for that individual until they'd been removed from the school. But ultimately, I would trust the school, and I would feel that they knew better than I did. And this is the problem, is that there are so many people now who want to get involved in these issues and not trust professionals to do their job.
But in many cases, the professionals have let the children down. And you can't blame parents for standing up and saying, my son or daughter has received a totally inadequate education and something needs to be done. There's huge anger out there in this country about the massive decline in educational standards we've been through over the last couple of decades. There really is. The argument is, as I say, my friend that runs a big school in Kent, he says it's 1 in 5 or fewer, but if 1 in 5, and if that happens to be the person that is in charge of your son or daughter's education, that matters to you a hell of a lot, and there's got to be a mechanism to get rid of people far more quickly than we currently have.
If you're saying that 1 in 5 teachers need sacking, then shame on you.
Well, that may be true. It may be true.
Should universities become responsible for setting the standards for A-levels?
Nigel Farage.
Well, there aren't many things this coalition's doing that I really agree with, but I do think Michael Gove is very committed, understands what he's doing, and he recognises that in the Labour years we dumbed down A-levels. You know, the idea that our 18-year-olds are getting brighter and better every year is frankly complete, absolute nonsense, and we all know it. And so what Gove is trying to do is to give the universities the ability to set the standard. And I commend him on that. However, there is a bigger debate about what university is and what it's for. And I'm going to agree with them on this, because I think we're actually sending too many youngsters to university. Far too many. We seem to have this very odd form of snobbery in this country, that if at 16 or 17 your son or daughter says, I want to learn a skill, I want to learn a trade, I want to be a plumber, I want to be a carpenter, we say, oh no, you've got to go and get a degree in an ology. So I think we've got to change our attitudes in this country, and let's start recognising that actually many of our youngsters would be far better off leaving school at 16 and learning trades and skills. I really believe that.
Following the fracas between Boris and Ken, should politicians be required to publish their tax returns?
Nigel Farage.
Oh, I'm thoroughly enjoying the row. Ken Livingstone, it's the wonderful case of the bite a bit, isn't it? He thought by Boris exposing how much his outside earnings were, it would damage Boris, and in fact it's actually rather damaged Ken, because he appears to be withholding the full truth. So on the face of it, it's very tempting to say, isn't it, there should be absolute full transparency, and we should know absolutely everything about people that stand for public office. I've got a slight concern about that. How far back do we go? Do we ask for last year's tax returns? Do we ask for the last 30 years' tax returns? Do we ask for people's medical records? I mean, how far does this go? And my problem with it is this. We've currently got a parliament, a government, that is absolutely dominated by a group of people who've lived off trust funds for the whole of their lives, who are totally out of touch with reality. And I have a feeling, if we go down this route of saying, show us what you've made, show us what you've earned, we will actually put off joining politics people who've been successful in their own private lives and careers. Goodness me, there's a dearth enough of talent in Parliament as it is, and I think we're going too far if we head down this route. I really do.
Is that a fair description of the cabinet ministers that you're acquainted with?
It's not a fair description of many cabinet ministers I know, and I
well,
think
Osborne's never had a job, has he?
Eric Pickles would find a very surprising characterisation of him, for example.
What did the Prime Minister do after university, John? What did the Chancellor do after university? They're all college kids playing politics, aren't they, who all come from very wealthy families. They're out of touch.
To our audience now, Jackie State asks, should politicians be required to publish their tax returns? Who thinks they should be required so to do? Would you put your hands up? Who thinks they shouldn't? Well, the overwhelming majority of this audience believes that they should not be so required.
Is it possible to imagine that email and phone surveillance is not an infringement onto someone's personal life?
Is it possible to imagine that email and phone surveillance is not an infringement into someone's personal life? This springs from the now very fiercely contested view of the government that the rights of the state to have access to aspects of people's private lives in the form of letters and telephone calls should be extended to emails and phone. Nigel Farage.
Well, it's all a bit rich, this debate, isn't it? When Labour were in government, they wanted to have a big centralised database, and the Tories and Lib Dems screamed about it, and now they're in government, they want the internet service providers to hold it on their behalf. It's a ridiculous, nonsensical debate. Of course it's an infringement, referring back to our question. Look, the job of the UK government is to protect our liberties, not to abolish them, and that, it seems to me, is what's going on here. But there's a bigger question here. I know Jonathan won't like this at all, because we're supposed to not discuss Europe here. Because that's meant to be entirely foreign, and the entire panel will deny it as well. But please ask yourselves, why is this happening? And why is this government attempting to do the same thing that the last government tried to do? It's because of a European directive that came in 2002 and was updated in 2006 that makes it a requirement under national law in this country that we make telephone providers, internet service providers, and that is now to be updated, keep the information for a minimum of a year. And if you were worried, any of you, that this data could be accessed by the UK government, please think more broadly than that. This data can be accessed by 27 other governments in Europe. That is why this is happening, and this issue exposes the extent to which our political class are in total denial about the extent to which they have given away our ability to run our own country.
Is marriage owned by the state?
Nigel.
Look, civil partnerships have worked extremely well. There's no argument anymore about unfairness. It's Easter. Let's have a thought about Christians, Christianity and our churches. And I think it's a mistake to go down a route that ultimately would force our churches into holding gay marriage services that are against their beliefs.
Viv Groscott. Thank you. That's the end of the programme.